You mentioned that you had some day jobs early on. When you were trying to get into comics. What are some jobs that you were doing back then?
Well, I had a lot. Like some lasted a half an hour. They were so horrible. A lot of retail. The first job I had, which was kind of artistic, and a lot of artistic people worked there. It was at an art foundry, which is a curious place. A lot of the hippie. This is like back in 1975. A lot of hippie types worked there. It's almost like hippies would get other hippies jobs there. And because it was an art foundry, because the point was turning sculpture into bronze or silver or gold or copper, it had this artistic element, but it still was a factory. It still was dirty and smelly, and people would get horribly injured. I remember once a guy poured boiling hot bronze on his foot. And another guy there was a certain chemical we had there that had to be kept at a cold temperature. It was like this chemical that you would paint it on a sculpture and then take a blowtorch to it to give it a patina. And so this chemical always had to be kept in a can in the refrigerator. And I don't know, maybe this guy was drunk or hungover because everybody knew what was in it. But I don't know what he was thinking, but he just grabbed it and drank it. So here comes the ambulance again. But the longest job and the best job I had was just being a clerk at Barnes & Noble. It was the first time I had a job that I liked and also didn't interfere at all with me trying at the same time to become a cartoonist. So that's the only job I had for any length of time. I worked there for over 3 years.
And when were you able to get to the point where you decided, okay, I'm at the level, I can throw away these day jobs and make a living on my art? How long did that take you?
Well, that's just it. It wasn't that easy. I couldn't have pulled any of it off if it wasn't for my wife, who she kept following the same trajectory where she would get a job as a waitress somewhere, then become a cook, and then become like a manager. And so needless to say, she made much better money than me. And when I was working at Barnes & Noble, it was like this small little branch of Barnes & Noble, and it was a 10-minute walk for me from where we were living to get there. But then we decided to move to Hoboken, New Jersey, which meant a commute. You had to get on this PATH train, and then I had a long walk still to get to where I worked. The commute was worthwhile for my wife because she was making good money. The commute seemed ridiculous to me because I wasn't making good money. So we both agreed that I would just, even though I wasn't even close to making a living, that I should just stay home and work full time on my comics. Try to get to that point. And that's been the case. That was like when I did that, when I quit my day job, I guess that would have been 1982. And it wasn't until 1990 that I was making like a livable wage. Maybe a little bit before then, but it's like a few years after that, I got my own comic book, Neat Stuff, which was taking up and I was working on Weirdo magazine. The two of those were taking up more than all of my time. I was just working morning, noon, and night on those two publications, and still was like making a 4-figure salary, and it was getting depressing. It was like I was doing better all the time, but it was like baby steps. It was so slow, and I kept thinking the whole time, what am I going to do? I've got to figure something out. And then it was very strange. After a while, my wife and I always talked about having a kid. Didn't look like I was ever going to make enough money to support a family, but she said, want to have a kid? And do you mind being a stay-at-home dad? And I said, yes, let's have a kid. No, I don't mind being a stay-at-home. And so we did. And that, crazily enough, I'm a stay-at-home dad. And then all of a sudden my comics got really popular. So it was like all day long changing diapers. And then the minute my wife came home, I would run downstairs to work on my comics. But then that's just it. After a couple of years, I was doing well enough that my wife had her own business. She owned a business with her sister, and her sister started having children. So then after a couple of years of that, both my wife and her sister decided we should just sell the business, and then they became the stay-at-homes. So yeah, things worked out, but it's sure you just never know. You never know how things are going to work out. These days too, I feel so sorry for anybody coming up now. You know, it's like, first of all, even before all this craziness happened with COVID and all of that, every time I go to a comic convention, you know, I'd have a table at Artist Alley, and I'd only go to a Comic-Con if they would comp me the table, you know, cover my expenses. But I'd go there, at least my expenses were covered, you know, the benefits of being an old timer, being a living legend. And, but it's these Comic-Cons, especially the more mainstream, well, even the indie ones, like the Artist Alleys were getting so huge. Like in Seattle at Emerald City Comic-Con, the last couple of years, the Artist Alley was like, took up the entire floor of a convention center. And I'd go in there and it'd just be like, it looked like 1,000 artists, 1,000 cartoonists. And I would just think, how are they all going to make a living? You know, there's too much competition. You know, I used to tell them, you know, you should all be thrown into a ring and try to kill each other because there's too many of you. You got to thin the herd.
A lot of people I've talked to have mentioned how they're working, you know, such long hours trying to get everything looking its best, because they know, especially as they get older, that if it's not the best, there's a younger kid scooping up from behind who's gonna take that job from them, you know.
Right, and there's no it tends to it comes and goes every now and then. There'll be some aspect of the comic book industry where all of a sudden there's a lot of work, like especially in the mainstream world. There suddenly is like a lot of work to be had doing comic books, but then there'll be some kind of a crash, some kind of a disaster, and those jobs dissipate so fast. You know, it just comes and goes, and it's so frustrating when you are making a decent living. You know, you've got some regular gig with a decent page rate, and it's really hard not to think, I'm set. It's like, why would this stop? But then it stops. You know, it's always been that way. I always marvel at cartoonists who stuck, like especially like with mainstream comics, who managed to keep a career going for decades. And you would think, well, they probably always had the same clients forever, but most of them didn't. A lot of them just had to jump around. During its death throes, I was doing comics for the Weekly World News. Do you remember that? And they were suffering. They were doing bad. They were not adapting to the digital age like the Onion did, and so they didn't know what to do. So somebody that was working at the Weekly World News said, well, he hired me to do a comic for them. So for 2 years, I did a comic for him. I really enjoyed it, and the pay was okay. And then after a while, he expanded it into a little comic section. So it had work by Sergio Aragonés, Gene Colan, you know, people who'd been around, have established careers. And I'd wonder, are they paying more than me? But they weren't. It's just like, even for them, decent paying work doesn't come along that often. And when somebody offers you a decent page rate, you just do it, you know? But that reminds me, though, I was at the San Diego Comic Convention, and I was walking down an aisle, and he was surrounded by fans, so I couldn't say anything to him. But Sergio Aragonés, he called me. He said, "Peter," and I go, "What?" And he holds up a copy of the Weekly World News. It's screaming above the crowd. He says to me, "Can we sink any lower?" I said, no, we can't.
When you do projects like this, it reminds me of something Tony Millionaire talked about when I spoke with him. He said that, and this is a little different, but he said the comics that he makes to him are kind of like advertising for his brand. because it's just a way of getting his name out there for people to see, oh, he's still around, he's still working, and then maybe they'll want to do a commission or an album cover or things like that. So when you were doing these kinds of jobs for other people, creepy and eerie and that kind of stuff, did you notice that like people seem to remember you're around and we're checking in on you and trying to find work that way? Did it feel like an advertising?
Well, that's just it. Well, my brand was Neat Stuff and especially Hate. It was doing that got me a lot of work. So establishing a brand like with 20 Million I was describing, I did that doing purely my own work, like with Buddy Bradley. And it was because of that I wound up getting work like the Marvel comics we're talking about. And I did a couple of series for DC, not long lived, but all of those jobs paid very well. And yes, I got that work because I established myself with Hate. To this day, that's still what I'm mainly known for. I don't do those comics anymore. I'm not drawing new Buddy Bradley comics anymore, but it's still that more than anything else is my brand. I'm still mainly known for that. And I still, every now and then I'll still get like a Hollywood development deal to turn Buddy Bradley into something, which again, it's especially if you get a development deal, it's good money, but for whatever reason, I've never gotten anything greenlit. Nothing ever got made or shown, unfortunately. Well, maybe fortunately, because once you cross that threshold, for example, if I was doing Hate or Buddy Bradley, developing it for a network, and it did get greenlit, and this is in every contract and it's non-negotiable, then they would own Hate and Buddy Bradley. I wouldn't own it anymore. I would cling to publishing rights, and that would be about it. But otherwise, they would own the characters. So sometimes it's a bit of a relief that I didn't get greenlit, because I had development deals with MTV twice. So twice I could have lost the rights to Buddy Bradley to MTV. Or Viacom, the parent company, or whoever owns Viacom now, under ruse.